So today we will be studying the first lecture of Culture and Psychology class. The title is Culture and Human Psyche, and I have taken these notes and I will be going over my notes while explaining the concepts. And these are based on the slides that are given by Banu Hoca, and also the book itself. The book is Handbook of Cultural Psychology. So, but we will be going over the notes because they're kind of like, they have everything that we need for the class. So I would like to go over them. What is cultural psychology? Cultural psychology is the study of culture and psychology in a dynamic field, and we investigate the influence between sociocultural environments and human psychological processes, and we extend and enrich general psychological science by doing that. So collective programming of mind differentiates members of one group and category from others, basically. Like how, like for example, I'm assuming that you're a person who lives in Turkey, and we have a collective programming of mind in Turkey as Turkish people, or whereas like a European person, they have a different collective programming of mind. So when we look at cultural psychology, we're trying to investigate the difference between different collective programming of minds, or like the differences between that, or just the qualities of different collective programmings of the mind. So it is loosely integrated system of ideas, practices, social institutions that enable coordination of behavior within the population. So when we talk about cultural psychology, we are talking about something that is dynamic. It's a dynamic cycle of mutual constitution, like the culture shapes the individual and the individual shapes the culture. Like sometimes, look at the French Revolution, etc. Like the individual themselves are changing the culture, like creating the culture. But like when you're born, you get born to certain structures, certain culture, and you adapt to it, and it shapes the kind of person you become. So in this sense, it's a mutual constitution, and it beyond nation, it is based on social class, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, organization, generation, profession, etc. So it's not just like being like Turkish, living in Turkey. It's also about like what gender you identify yourself as, or like the religion that you belong to, you believe in, or the organizations that you're involved in, generation that you were born into, etc. All these things that create different kinds of cultures, which affect again the person you become. We have dimensional frameworks. Firstly, we can talk about the Hofstede's model. I don't know how to pronounce any of these names, so I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing any names wrong. And then we will continue with the Schwartz theory. So Schwartz model. I'm sorry. So let's start with Hofstede's model. So I don't know the gender of any of these people, so I will just call them they. So 6 dimensions of national culture. Hofstede's model gives the 6 dimensional of national culture. So there is power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism. There's masculinity versus femininity. But I heard from Banu Hoca that this is now changed, and now we don't use the masculinity femininity part, because they were like defining masculinity as like wanting to be like successful, ambition, and femininity, as I'm assuming passivity or something, I don't know, but now we don't define it like that, thank God. Long versus short-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. So he just like they look at these categories, and they kind of give different scores to different countries. And then we have Schwartz. Schwartz says there is 10 basic motivationally distinct values, and these values form circular structure that reflects motivational conflicts and compatibilities that are apparently culturally universal. So that's the Schwartz model. He just gave like 10 basic motivationally distinct values, and we can kind of highlight that. I don't. All right. So let's continue. So across societies, there is consensus on high importance of benevolence, universalism, self-direction values, and low importance of power, tradition, and stimulation values. Let's look at, again, I'm going to pronounce these names terribly, I'm sorry. There is Inglehart's Dynamic Theory of Cultural Change, and in this theory, the key contribution is the dynamic concept of culture, and there's a generational shift in cultural orientations from existential security to expressive freedom, to economic development, higher SES, and generational effects. So, there's a generational shift in cultural orientations with time, and that's what Inglehart says in their dynamic theory of cultural change. So, they give a dynamic concept of the culture, which is like changing from when we grow from when you go past the existential security, we can kind of have an expressive freedom, we can have economic development and higher SES and generational effects. All right. So then we have two dimensions. This framework reduces cross-national cultural variation to two main dimensions. So first we have traditional versus secular rational values, and then we have we have survival versus self-expression, emancipative values. So there are two dimensions. Firstly, it's traditional versus secular rational values. Second, it's either survival versus self-expression or emancipative values. So cultural psychology means that there's a mutual constitution of culture and psyche. So we can use qualitative methods or emic approach. Emic approach is studying the culture from inside the culture, focused on the inside elements. That's what emic approach means. If you have taken anthropology, I think you would know. I did not, so I had to learn it through this class. So emic approach is studying culture from inside the culture, focused on the inside elements. So psychological means cultural. What I mean is that what we experience psychologically is strongly connected to culture, and what we experience psychologically affects the culture directly, and the cultural things, unfortunately, affects our psychology as well. So culture, in the sense, it is central to psychology, and we need to take culture into account way more than we do now. And we will get into that, I believe. So Cross-cultural psychology is identifying the universal psychology principles by systematic comparison of psychology, and this is just happening like cross cultures, you know. It's like comparing the cultures, functioning across cultures, and we can, in order to study cross-cultural psychology, we use qualitative methods and ethic approach from the outside, like looking for things from the outside. It's the opposite of emic. So culture is an external variable, and it influences the behavior. And CCP is finding differences. It's like cross-cultural psychology. I was like, what is this? I did not understand what it was at first. I'm sorry. CCP, cross-cultural psychology, is finding differences across cultures. We can use this one. Okay. Finding differences across cultures. So basically, so we don't really give any attention to similarities and just invariance between groups. We just look at the variance, the differences between the groups. So but we do, when we are doing cross-cultural psychology, what do you say, like studies, we are missing on something important, which is the fact that usually within country differences is much more than between country differences. What this means is that, like, when we look at like Japanese people, for example, we usually think of like Japanese people as like introverted and kind of like workaholics, and therefore maybe depressed. I don't know. So we think of like Japanese people, things like that, and then the American people like extroverted, like the right opposite. Right opposite of the not right opposite, but like very extroverted, very like outgoing and warm, etc. So the point is that there is a huge variety in how Japanese people are. They're not like one size fits all. Like Japanese people come in a variety of personalities, but what we are doing when we are doing cross-cultural psychology study is that we're putting them in the small box where they have to be an introvert, they have to be a workaholic, compared to, like, we're acting like all Japanese people are workaholics, they're all introverted, and all Americans are very like extroverted, they're very warm. The reality is that the differences between Japanese people or between American people is much more than the differences between these two countries. So when we do a cross-cultural study, we kind of miss on this point. So we need to take these into account when we are when we are doing a cross-cultural psychology study. So it has a huge interpretation problem. It causes so what we need to do is that, because cultural psychology kind of looks into the culture, it's not really like focusing on the comparison of cultures, and cross-cultural is completely focused on the comparing the cultures. So we need to integrate these two things, and so we can have a comprehensive and inclusive psychological science. I hope that makes sense. So this stationary conception of culture, which is done in Hofstede's study. Let's look at Hofstede's study again. So he has a more, he has a more stationary concept, and Inglehart has a more reductionist concept. So Hofstede said, I believe there are like 6 elements. there are 6 dimensions of national culture, and there is power distance, there's uncertainty avoidance, there's individualism versus collectivism, there's masculinity versus femininity, there's long versus short-term orientation, indulgence and versus restraint, and then we kind of focus on the Inglehart. So this one is the reductionist one. That's very dynamic, like the culture is dynamic. When we get rid of the existential, like when we have the existential security and the economic development, we kind of shift to these things, he says. They say, I'm sorry. So, I moved too much. So, we need to combine these 2 theories so they become more accurate, because one is too stationary and the other is 2 reductions. So, we need to combine these 2 things. We need more than differences. So, we need more than CCP. We need to find the underlying mechanisms of these things and universality in underlying biological and cognitive mechanisms. So often I think we can give some really fascinating examples to this. I'll find the examples and have. See, this is a famous Müller-Lyer illusion, as you might know. So I'm sorry, this is such a bad picture, but so the point is that usually Western people get this illusion that this one is bigger, the one in the middle is bigger than the other ones, and this one is especially the shortest. Well, this is the second longest one. Whereas African people usually don't have any problems with perception. They see that these all are actually at the same height. They're not really neither one is longer or shorter or anything like that, and they can kind of see that. This really shows us that culture affects basic perception, and culture affects brain way more significantly that we had thought before. So I wanted to show that. I think that's kind of important. So so we need to, if we want to really see the universality in underlying biological and cognitive mechanisms, we need to look at the culture. We need the CCP, the cross-cultural psychology, and the cultural psychology, because most of the psychology studies that we are doing is relying only on the weird people, weird people, if you don't know, it's white, educated, I don't know what I is, it's industrialized. Okay, so it's white people that are educated, that are industrialized, living in industrial countries, that are rich, and they're democratic. So we're just focusing on these people because these people hold the power. These people fund the psychological studies and everything. They have the power. So we rely on the weird people, but we kind of use these the results of these studies as if they are universally accurate. But the fact is that they are not. They're just focused on a really particular and small group of people that usually the studies don't really represent, unfortunately, the whole world or anything. It's just representing a small part of the world that hold the power. So yeah, we have talked about the mutual constitution and cultural psychology is practices, habits, ways of doing rather than abstract high-level values. So we have a little picture here that I really liked, and this picture is showing that there is ideas, there's institutions, and then there's interactions, and then there's individual, and these all are connected, and we hold the power to change things, but things also hold the power to change us. So I think like a very beautiful message that we can take from this picture is that we need to question a lot of ideas that are coming from like the interactions that we had with people, that like we need to question things that come from the institutions, our groups, the norms that we learn, etc. So we can effectively change some of these ideas that are not beneficial for us, for the society. We need to question everything that we were taught, because most of the time most of these ideas were not really questioned when they were taught, and they are not beneficial to us anymore. So none is really assumed to be prior to others, these things. But let's see. So we have interdependent self and there's independent self. When in independent self, you identify yourself as an individual that has a lot of like, you're here, and then the others kind of like, they can relate to you, but you are an individual like with free will, you can do whatever you want, you have a lot of individualism, etc. But in interdependent self, like in independent self, you would be like, if someone asks you like who you are, like your personality, you would be defining yourself through maybe your hobbies, maybe the job that you do, like the things that you value, as an individual. But in interdependent self, you will be more likely to define yourself through the relationships that you have with others. Like you could tell that you're daughter of someone, or you could tell that you're very close friends with certain people. You will be defining yourself through the connections with others. That is why we say interdependent self and independent self. So let's look at what I wrote. So I wrote uniqueness, self-expression, choice when talking about. Oops, sorry, I didn't think that's true. So there's uniqueness, there is self-expression and choice, and the importance of choice, of course. We see that a lot in the. Okay. So it's the my way agency, and in interdependent self, we have less resourced context. There is emphasizing relationships and adjusting to situations and following the norms, viewing agency as originating from others and obligations. Obligations. So let's look at the key generalizations. The weird problem. So we only focused on the weird people, as we had talked about earlier. And this is a big problem, because weird people are literally the outliers in the world. They are seen like we are. Everyone else, everyone else are the outliers that are minorities, but they are the minority. They're just like, they're making up like a very little portion of the whole world population. So it's a big problem that most psychology studies, research is focused on them. Culture is not an overlay, not just a lens, but it's a fundamental shapes. It's fundamental, and it shapes basic psychological processes, like how the brain functions. We have talked about the Müller-Lyer perceptual illusion, and how genes are expressed. So culture is a big thing, and Müller experiment like the perceptual illusion, it's just one example. There are many examples, not just in perception, in every aspect of how our brain works. Like the culture's effects are just really fascinating to think about. Then we have intersectionality and inequality. All people are actually multicultural when you come to think of it, because even if you are, let's say like you are white and you're male and you are coming from like you are in the upper class, so you are the privileged of all, and you have like all these things are like different cultures, or they are they have different aspects of cultures, like being a male, being from upper class, or being white. Although they may have things in common, they are coming, like they're not the same culture, you know. So you will be sharing all these things and other things that we did not take into account right now. So cultures exist within power hierarchy. There's downward constitution, like weird people lead differences of less powerful groups seen inferior. So anything about the people that are not weird is inferior because they lead the differences of less powerful groups. So they lead the research. So obviously that's how it works. Cultural fits and clash. So congruence between one's way of being and context norms. So basically what this means is that, let's say that you're a very individualistic person, you have an independent sense of self, and you want to express your individualism, you want to have freedom, you know, to express yourself, etc. But you live in a very interdependent self-like country where that is ruled with like harsh rules, like you cannot go against the norms. It's a funny example, but then there will be a lot of clashes because the context's norms are different than your way of being, and this would affect your well-being, your performance, etc. The mismatch and undermine motivation and trust. So there are empirical advances, like in cognition. Cognitive styles are influenced by things like local ecology. We will be talking about this in the next chapter. It's a really fascinating chapter. And in emotion, like emotional suppression is seen as a bad thing, as it's negative to your mental health in US. But it is not really, like emotional suppression is not really a bad thing in East Asia. So emotional acculturation occurs when immigrants' emotional responses align with the new culture. Like usually, let's say that you are an East Asian immigrant, right? You came to the US and now you're living in the US, and you see that you used to suppress your emotions because that's like what is normal in your country, and now you are in the US and it is seen as a bad thing. It's a bad thing for your mental health, etc. So now you are aligning your emotional responses to the new culture, to American culture. So that's what emotional acculturation means. So methods advances include measuring culture through cultural products like artifacts like media, advertisements, and songs. Apply cultural psychology insights to understand culture clashes and societal divides. Targeted interventions for inclusive, equal, effective, multicultural society. We need to apply cultural psychology insights to understand cultural clashes and societal divides. Incorrect assumptions of cultural psychology. Some of the assumptions that are incorrect. Let's see. Cultural psychology is about finding group differences. No, it's the cross-cultural psychology is about finding group differences. Cultural psychology doesn't appertain to group similarities. No, it looks at the group similarities as well as the differences. Cultural psychology concerns only group level analysis. No. Cultural psychology is irrelevant to basic psychological processes, and that's not true. We have seen this in the Müller-Lyer experiment. We have seen that actually the African people don't really have any problems with detecting the height of each stick, but American people or European people usually have quite a bit of a problem. So obviously the culture is affecting our basic psychological processes as well. Cultural psychology is used to confirm generalizability of theories. We need to use cultural psychology for way more than that. We need to it shouldn't be used only to confirm generalizability. We need to really look into cultural psychology and question some of the things that we have accepted and we have generalized to the entire world, because weird people show these things. Like, we have seen it in the weird people. They do not represent the whole world population. So this was it for the first chapter. Thank you for attending the class. Thank you for listening, and see you next class.